This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Shahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellowwallpod podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 466 of the Yellowwallpod. I'm your host, Stefan Botzko, and today we'll talk about the scoreless draw away to Heidenheim, and we will preview Friday's game against SC Freiburg. For all that and more, joins me Lars Perlman. Hello Lars, how are you doing?
Hello Stefan, not too bad, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well, doing swell. Looking forward to discussing a lot of things with you, including, of course, the step forward, according to Sebastian Kehl. Not a large step, but also not a step backward, according to the sporting director, with the scoreless draw against Heidenheim. Now, Lars, I obviously don't want to waste a lot of time on this game because it does not deserve much of our time. However, what was that all about, and why does the sporting director have a very interesting sense of reality?
I mean, the really interesting part is that I thought Edin Terzic was quite negative, for his standards, because quite often he tends to try to look for positives in even a disappointing game, and this time he didn't really do that. I mean, Terzic, one could argue he threw some players under the bus without naming them, because he talked about players who were basically complaining because of a lack of playing time over the last few weeks and months, getting a chance and not using it. So that will have applied probably to someone like Youssoufa Moukoko, maybe Meunier and a couple of others, Özcan, for example. And then the sporting director turns around and says, well, that wasn't so bad, actually. I mean, I don't really have an explanation. I don't understand the disconnect there. I'm definitely more in Terzic's camp. I think long-time listeners know that my glasses tend to be half empty instead of half full. And I just don't get what Kehl was trying to argue there. I mean, I guess a draw at Heidenheim after winning 3 games, the start into the new calendar year is still good. I think 10 points ahead of those 4 games, we would have signed up for that. And especially with 3 of those games coming away from home, and in a vacuum, a draw at Heidenheim on a Friday evening, it's not the end of the world in terms of results, but the performance being so drab, I don't get why Kehl felt the need to be Mr. Positive.
Yeah, neither do I, and I really was scratching my head. I was actually double checking if this quote was even real when I first read it, because I think I read it on like the BVB news blog or so, and sometimes this site gets spoofed where they like turn the L into a large I or something. Anyway, it was a weird, irritating comment, if I'm honest, and of course it was also a weird, irritating performance. I think it's safe to say that Heidenheim can be kicking themselves for not winning the game, especially in the end when they had very good chances. Of course, Daniel Mahlen scored, and he was marginally offside. Obviously, if Dortmund go ahead in this game, the chances of them winning it might be higher, but who knows if that's actually true. Either way, very uninspiring substitutions toward the end also did not really help matters, whether it was Bensebaini or Ole Pullman or so. Didn't really catalyze anything, to be honest. I once again have to say I think Niklas Süle currently is doing not great when it comes to build-up play. That is very worrying, especially when you have a right back that also doesn't really know how to dribble or pass out of pressure. But Thomas Meunier, I think we can jump to the next topic while your fridge turns on, Lars, has been carted off to Trabzonspor, and Dortmund do not receive a transfer fee, but they are saving 4 million euros of the remaining salary that they otherwise would have had to pay to the Belgian international. Lars, I think Riasson is back in training. Is this a good move for Dortmund, or would they be lacking depth on the right wing position considering how injury prone their fullbacks are?
I mean, given the fact that Meunier has started the last 7 Bundesliga games, I am somewhat surprised that they would let him go. But as you alluded to, Riasson is back in team training. He didn't have, the typical Dortmund muscular injury or whatever. It was kind of a freakish accident at the end of the Stuttgart Cup game. So, and he's not known to be particularly injury prone. So there's a reasonable expectation that Riasson can go the rest of the season relatively unhindered. Marius Wolf had some issues with illness in the winter break, which is why he had a bit of catch up to do in terms of being ready to play. But at Heidenheim, I think he played his first 30 or so minutes off the bench, replacing Meunier. So I think those two can be penciled in for the rest of the season. Then if push comes to shove, you can also push Süle out wide. That has happened, and he actually looked quite good there at times already in his Dortmund career. You still have Matteo Murray, who's apparently had another setback of some kind, since the winter break, which was reported, I think, by Ruhr-Nachrichten. Hasn't really been made public by Dortmund, which, as we said last week, isn't necessarily a surprise. I think there's enough personnel to get by without Meunier, and especially given how much they can save. I mean, I kind of doubt the 4 million number, because it's not actually 6 months that they're now saving, but let it be 3.5 million. I think that's still something you take, given that, assuming Riasson and Wolf are ready to go for the rest of the season, you would quite possibly be looking at Meunier not making the matchday squad sometimes. And given that he was definitely not getting a new contract in the summer, I think they also kind of accommodated him, because he must have gotten a fairly significant contract offer from Trabzonspor, because quite frankly, most players are better off moving as free agents in the summer than moving, late in the window, or even the most transfer windows in Europe aren't even open anymore. I think you can go to Austria and Turkey and Sweden and like Romania, Croatia, but none of the big leagues right now. So usually you'd be better off not moving at this point. So I'm assuming he got a decent contract offer there. Don't know how long it is, but still. Ultimately I think Meunier goes down as one of the more disappointing signings they've made. Obviously, one can argue whether or not he actually exceeded expectations or failed to meet them, because I think quite a few people were, not necessarily sure that he'd be the right fit, to succeed Lukas Piszczek, and ultimately they've tried in a number
and Achraf Hakimi.
And Hakimi, and they've obviously tried to remedy that with a few signings now, and I think the prospect of Maatsen and Riasson for the rest of the season is quite good. And then we have to wait and see what happens in the summer with Maatsen, whether Riasson has to be shifted back to the left because Benzabaini is not good enough. Maybe they sign a right back, so that's all to be determined. But I think Meunier wasn't going to feature in their future plans, and ultimately, if you can spend however much it is now for 5 months, that's ultimately business well done, I suppose.
Yeah, I would agree, and I'm also semi-glad that Meunier is gone, to be honest, because as I said before, he definitely would be helpful for Dortmund, but it's also not like that he is going to be a player that really helps Dortmund in the long term. He is a short-term gap player, and as he said, it was not a good piece of transfer business by Dortmund overall, so we're glad this is over. And people obviously on Twitter, I think today it plopped up talking about Dortmund being in a transitional season, where they are always in a transitional season. So Lars, maybe final question on that subject. If Dortmund go into the next season the way they're set up now, do you think they need to look out for number one right back, or do you think that Ryerson can assume that position on a long term, or do you think Dortmund actually need an upgrade over Ryerson if they want to be the ambitious club that they are apparently?
When you say current setup, does that include Madsen or not?
Yes, I would say Madsen is included in that, because otherwise we might have to think about Ryerson on playing on the left, because Bensebaini, of course, is to Meunier 2.0 when it comes to misunderstandings and fullback transfers. I
mean, I wouldn't necessarily go that far with Bensebaini, but assuming
I am, I'm just I
know you don't appreciate the transfer so far, and I think it's definitely been a disappointing return, but I still think that Bensebaini has shown more in his time before Dortmund than Meunier ever did. I think if Meunier hadn't been at PSG ahead of signing for Dortmund, he probably wouldn't have been on the radar. I mean, it's not like he had years of production in the Bundesliga like Bensebaini had. So, but going back to your question, I'm kind of iffy on Rierson's long-term prospects. I think he's definitely a valuable player to have just because of versatility, and you kind of know what you're getting with him because he's more of an effort player. I think it's fair to say than necessarily the best football player or technique-wise and all that. He's not necessarily up to the highest of standards, but I think a club of Dortmund size can afford to have some of those guys, even in the first 11. Going back to more successful periods of Dortmund's recent past, you always had the role players. Even if maybe I'm making myself unpopular now, but I would argue that Lukas Piszczek probably was more of an effort player than pure quality, at least most of his career, and they were definitely fine with him at right back for a number of years. Ultimately, I think it's fairly safe to assume that after Meunier, also Marius Wolf is going to leave. Matteo Murray cannot be seriously considered a first-team player right now, so they will have to sign a right back in the summer unless Wolf has an amazing end of the season and earns another contract, which I think is kind of doubtful.
See that.
Yeah,
I don't see it.
So they will probably have to sign a right back, and I would hope that it's someone with a higher ceiling than Ryerson, perhaps, but also someone that wouldn't be necessarily opposed to being considered the second option going into the season. So ultimately, I would like for them to go for, let's say, a 19, 20-year-old talented player who needs to learn the ropes a bit behind Ryerson, can spell him and maybe overtake him at the end of his first season or a little bit later down the road.
Do you think a right-footed Ian Maatsen would be enough, or do you need some different, let's say, archetype to counteract whatever Ian Maatsen is? If that makes sense.
I mean, I don't necessarily know if any of the big clubs in Europe have two, let's say, ball playing or midfield drifting or whatever fullbacks. I mean, the closest might be Liverpool when Robertson and Alexander-Arnold are playing, but I mean, Robertson hasn't been shifted into midfield as much or ever, I think, whereas Alexander-Arnold is basically a midfielder, especially for England these days. So yeah, I think for whatever reasons, teams seem to be reluctant to mirror, as it were, having one technically proficient fullback with another on the other side. Even at Dortmund, there was, when Guerrero was playing on the left, you usually had one on the right who was a bit more conservative, I suppose, or, more defensively minded or whatever. So I think there must be some reason for that. So I would assume that if they can keep Maatsen, which is obviously a fairly big question mark, I think someone like Ryerson, who isn't totally inept going forward, but is still more defensive-minded and solid in duels and backtracking and all that, I think that would probably be preferable for them. But as I said, I think we are kind of making a big assumption if we say that Maatsen is definitely going to stay, because the 35 million euro release clause he has in his new Chelsea contract, that is probably going to be a bit rich for Dortmund next summer, considering they will have a number of holes to fill.
Yeah, it's not only that, but I assume that Benzo Baini is also earning wages of the first choice left back, and it's not that easy that you just put someone in front of him and can then argue about paying all this kind of money without shipping him off and clearing him off the books, if you will, first. So I think this is also something to consider, which is why my belief in either Sancho or Maatsen being retained past this season are very low, to be honest. Likewise, Lars, currently Mats Hummels and also Marco Reus, I think, are in negotiations with the club about a potential contract renewal. Quick check-in with you. Would you renew both contracts, just one or neither?
Well, first of all, Reus, as far as we know, isn't actually in talks or negotiations with them. Only Hummels is. Actually, on Wednesday, the day we are recording this, there was a report that Hummels and his father were meeting with Kehl in Dortmund's offices.
Yeah, there was a picture of Hummels' dad too, so I guess that's confirmed.
Yeah.
Marco Reus' dad did not show up.
I don't actually know if I've ever seen Marco Reus' father, now that you mention it.
I don't think I have either.
No, I think it's fair to say that they want to keep Hummels, but he will decide, and I don't think it's going to come particularly soon, whether to actually keep playing, because he's 35, I think, or going to be 35 at the end of the... No, I'm going to be 30, so he must be 36 at the end of the year, which is an absolute depressing thought.
Yeah, there are very few players still older than us on the team. God damn it!
So I'm kind of banking on Hummels not wanting to quit. I mean, he got back into the German national team, so he's definitely still got the quality. He was amazing in the Champions League this season. So I think he's still got lots to give, and they would be quite stupid not to take him up on another year if he wants to. The reporting on Reus is quite different. There seems to be a consensus among club reporters and all that he's probably not going to be offered a contract extension outright, because he's on too high wages, apparently blocking the development of younger players who...
who?
Yeah, I don't necessarily know whom people might be speaking about, especially now that Reyna's gone. And apparently Reyna has been loaned out with a view to rehabilitate his market value ahead of a sale in the summer instead of coming back. That's the reading of tea leaves, as it were, in Germany right now. So it seems like Reus is not going to get a contract offer. Whether he would take them up on it, I don't know, because I think he's been quite unhappy with both, playing time at times this season, and also all the talks about him, being a rebel inside the locker room, and him being an instigator of internal criticism against Terzic and all that. He's denied the allegations, but I don't know whether he'd be up for another season of that stuff. And all the talk about him is always going to be, former captain, gave up the armband. Is he just coasting towards the end of his career, or is he actually trying to accomplish something great at the end of his career, whatever? So my prediction right now would be that Hummels gets another contract and Reus probably goes to the United States or whatever.
Yeah, although I would not be surprised if Hummels also leaves for the MLS at the end of the season. I don't know what his decision-making process is, but I think he's considering it. So we'll see. Either way, I think that would be definitely a new era for Dortmund if those two players leave one way or another, just because they have been such cornerstones for the Black and Yellows for so long. We'll obviously keep an eye on it. Maybe I should also mention, because I didn't do it last episode, that Julian Reikhoff, Dortmund's under-19 striker, has joined Ajax Amsterdam. So he, I think, joined Dortmund from Ajax. if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
Before, and obviously Dortmund had high hopes on him, but the fact that he is now back at Ajax means that things did not work out quite well. And I should also mention that Henry Blank, who of course moved to Salzburg for a fee between 6 and 7 million, has a buyback clause in his contract for 12 million euros, according to reports. So that of course is good to have for Dortmund if he indeed has a good development over in Austria. And other than that, all I have left to say is that Dortmund play Freiburg on Friday. And after the scoreless draw away to Heidenheim, I'm hoping that this Friday night game will be somewhat more interesting against a team that is somewhat in the middle of the Bundesliga table right now. Freiburg are a team that make it difficult for anyone, I would say, they play, but currently they are not. I don't know. I think they're an okay team. I mean, they're in 7th place with 8 wins and 4 draws and 8 losses. But it just feels like they are somewhere more in the midfield than really in the race for the European spots. If that makes sense. Obviously, they are not far off Frankfurt. They have 28 points, while Frankfurt have 31 points. But I don't know. It just feels quality-wise, there's just such a gulf between Freiburg and Frankfurt. I'm just not seeing Freiburg getting up any higher, even though Frankfurt somehow miraculously lost to 1. FC Köln, which is something I certainly did not predict. But Lars, what can we expect on Friday night from this game? Maybe I should preface this by saying that I think back in team training are Gregor Kobel, Marco Reus, Julian Brandt, and who did I forget? Someone else.
Riasson Adeyemi.
Riasson. Oh, wow. Adeyemi too. That's good. I don't know if they'll be ready to play already on Friday, but at least there's hope that some players will return and we will have a little bit more depth and creativity in the starting lineup. Anyway, Lars, what can I expect?
I mean, the thing is, I would agree with you that Freiburg kind of seemed to have a middling squad and middling season, which they will never take for granted because there's no natural law that says SC Freiburg has to be among the top 8 or so clubs in Germany. I think that's still something they will consider an achievement at the end of the year, especially considering they are playing in the Europa League, I think, and I think they also made the eliminatory round before the knockout stages. I don't necessarily remember whom they are facing there, but
they're playing Lens.
Lens, yeah.
Lens.
Lens is legendary.
Lens I'm just being. I knew I was gonna butcher it.
Yeah. Freiburg, I think on the weekend they lost against Stuttgart. They were down 2 goals before I even turned the simulcast on because I was fixing my lunch. And they were already 2 goals down. Then they had Merlin Röhl, kind of a shooting star in midfield, sent off for a stamp, basically. I mean, it wasn't deliberate. It was quite unfortunate for the young guy, but he's been suspended for the next 2 games, so he's out against Dortmund. I mean, it feels like Freiburg, we could probably cut in what we said about them the last time they faced at Dortmund, and most of the stuff would still apply because obviously they still have Christian Streich as head coach, and they are always going to be roughly the same team, I would suppose. Someone not easy to push over, good at set pieces from Grifo. They are very well organized because they have so much consistency in all areas of their sporting development. But I don't necessarily remember the last time they really troubled Dortmund in Dortmund. I think the meeting last season, Dortmund came back in the second half and kind of stomped them.
It was 5-1 the last 2 games in Dortmund.
Yeah.
And then 4-0 and then 1-0.
Yeah, and the last time they met at Freiburg was very early last season when Dortmund looked to be on their typical early season slump, and then Bynoe-Gittens, Moukoko, and Wolf scored off the bench or something like that, or were involved in goals off the bench. So I think there was a stat for a long time that Christian Streich had never beaten Dortmund, and then he won 2 games in a row or something like that. But I think, as you just now said, the last few games have swung back in Dortmund's favor, and ultimately this is one of them where you know who the opponent is, not only knowing the name, but you know what Freiburg stand for. But if that's a big problem for you at home at this point of the season on the back of a decent start to the calendar year, then you have real issues. And I suppose they do, because we have talked at length in the last few episodes about their build-up play and holes in spaces where you shouldn't have holes. So I'm really looking forward to the return of Brandt or Reus, just because this 2-striker formation does not work for Dortmund in both in an attacking sense and in defensive transition. So having one of those guys back would already be quite big.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Also, I'm not a big guy on the whole 4-4-2 setup. I don't think it really helps Dortmund or caters to their strengths. I also do expect Moukoko being dropped, to be honest, just because of the comments Terzic had and just the way he played against Heidenheim. He looked very out of place, to be honest, and that was just certainly not a good game from him. And I would totally understand if Terzic drops him again after this. So, I'll be honest, I would appreciate if Mats Hummels returns to the starting lineup. He should be fit enough, because Niklas Süle has had too many blunders in recent games that nearly cost Dortmund dearly. And so I think it's time to bring Hummels back. I think Nico Schlotterbeck currently is actually in pretty good form, and considering he's playing against his former team, that should be some extra motivation, as it usually is for a guy like him. So, I do expect Dortmund to win this, if I'm honest, but that doesn't mean, of course, that they will. Unfortunately, but Lars, I do believe that maybe if you have Emre Can back, maybe even as a holding midfielder, there should be a bit more finesse than with Özcan, who also did not look great recently, and Freiburg, usually the way they play, makes things a little bit easier for Dortmund as well. I don't expect them to be as well organized as Heidenheim were, and Dortmund will probably get a little bit more space to play vertically. So all in all, it should be a more entertaining game, I hope, than the scoreless draw against Heidenheim. And with that, I think it's pretty much time to end the show. Do you have any final thoughts? Because I need to get out of here soon.
I think we would be remiss not to at least mention once how incredibly rare goalless draws for Dortmund are these days in the Bundesliga.
That is true.
Because the last one was, I think, November, October 2019, so autumn of 2019, which means under Lucien Favre against Schalke before they were relegated the first time, not the second time. And I mean, if time is a flat circle and all that, then that means that Dortmund probably play a goalless draw against Freiburg again, because I doubt it's going to be another 156 or however many games it was from the last goalless draw.
Yeah, it's very unlikely. I think on ESPN, Kyle Murray had the stat too at halftime, promising goals, and once I heard the stat, because it was some sort of record-setting stat, I knew this was definitely going to be a scoreless draw. And if she
commentators curse, yeah.
Yeah, and if she cursed anyone, it was Heidenheim that got cursed, because I don't recall Dortmund being anywhere near really scoring in the second half. So thank you for that. Saved Dortmund a point. And with that, thank you, Lars. I think it was good to bring that up, since this nice stat or not nice stat, depending on how you want to look at it, famously or infamously now died, since Dortmund had scoreless games, just conceded. So that's not a positive stat necessarily, just an interesting one. So yeah. I hope everyone has a great weekend. As always, thank you for listening, Lars. Thank you very much for lending your expertise. We shall be back with another episode next week between Freiburg and Wolfsburg, and then finally we will also eventually preview the Champions League match against PSV Eindhoven. And until then, have a good time. Goodbye.